On March 3rd, 2025, Donald Trump ordered the suspension of all military aid to Ukraine. Can you briefly explain what you think led to Trump's decision to withdraw the aid?
Oh, God. I think it's a few things. I think one thing is Trump made a promise on the campaign trail that was never realistic. And he did it because he was facing an incredibly tight race where he thought he was running against Biden. Now he's running against Harris. And he has to change his strategy last second. The polls indicated it, that it was going to be very close. And so Trump leaned into what he always does, which is crazy, unbelievable promises that are so bold and offer such gigantic change that it's such a rejection of the status quo that you would feel that, well, I think things might change at least for the better in one way, even if it's completely preposterous. Like the idea that the war was going to end in 24 hours. And it never did because it was never going to. But the promise remains, the commitment remains, and maybe people forget that it was a 24-hour promise. Maybe people forget exactly like the bounds of what was supposed to be agreed to, or the fact that it was supposed to be a peace through strength approach where we threatened the Russians with sanctions to like get them to the table, etc. Whatever it was, he made this promise, and he, I think, still wants to go through with it. He wants to go through the promise not only because then he satisfies his isolationist space and the America First space. He knows that most of the American people want peace. That is true. They poll that they want peace, but I also don't think they want peace to sell them out. So I think it's fulfilling the campaign promise is definitely one. I think another has to be that Trump, just quite frankly, seems like he wants to normalize with the Russians. He wants access to Russian minerals, or wants access to Russia, or he is friendly with Putin and wants a stronger relationship with Putin and with his government to work on things together. Whatever it is, he has been very eerily focused on the idea of reopening relations with Russia, removing the sanctions, and making big investment deals with the Russians, which is part of the reason why I think like this trade deal deterrence plan does not work to me. Because what the Republicans and what Trump's team is now saying is, well, maybe we don't got like a security arrangement as in like an alliance or something, but because we're going to be trading so much with the Ukrainians, that will in and of itself act as a security guarantee. It doesn't really make much sense if we also do that with the Russians.
Yep. Do you also feel that Zelensky's meeting at the Oval Office had anything to do with it, or was this already in place?
I think that this, you're walking a tightrope when you're talking to Trump. But the problem was that Trump's plan has so many flaws, and Zelensky's problem is that he told the truth and he pointed them out, right? He told the truth and he pointed them out. And even if you do it in an environment where everyone can see you, it's very obvious what the problem is, that the environment's just so partisan that everybody immediately goes into their trenches. And the first response of right-wing media was to demonize Zelensky, say he went after him, went after Trump. It was so horrible, so awful. And like, just not even do like basic reporting. For example, this big complaint that JD Vance had when he was whining about no thank yous. Zelensky, not only has he thanked the United States a million times over, he thanked the United States and the American people at like the start of that meeting. He just didn't remember, either because he was malicious or has the memory of a goldfish. So I don't really know how much like Zelensky's specific behavior really pushed it one way or the other, because at some point they had to confront the fact that a minerals deal is not a security agreement. The minerals deal was originally put in place by Trump because he wanted, or he asked when he was talking about this minerals deal, he saw it as paying debts owed by Ukraine. That now they're trying to turn it into a security arrangement because they're like, God damn it, they want this in order to have peace. Just say that our trade deal is also a security agreement. And so Zelensky points it out. He says there's no security agreement, really. There's no security guarantee. We need a security guarantee. And the Russians have violated agreements 25 times before. And Trump's response to that really was Trump and Putin get along. They're nice. They're friendly enough. And that he's going to, like, you know, he respects him and he won't cross him. Basically, you can trust Putin in a Trump presidency. Now, even if that was true, which I don't think is true, Trump is not president for life, right? And even if he does become president for life, he's going to die one day, and Ukraine will still exist and Russia will still exist. This war will exist past Trump because the world will keep turning past Trump. So once he's out of there, even if this is true, then the effect is gone. There's no real security guarantee here. There's no security arrangement. There's nothing outside of hope and prayers that the Trump administration is really offering the Ukrainians to dissuade a future invasion. And everything that's semi-serious that could, they're telling the Europeans to do it. So I don't really think like the meeting itself was the problem as much as what was brought up during the meetings. These glaring issues that they just chose to ignore are the issue.
So did you kind of expect it to happen, or was it a complete shock?
I mean, I expected that. I mean, once I heard Zelenskyy is a dictator, I thought the pressure was going to keep building, and that pressure could eventually extend over into the suspension of support in order to try to build up pressure, which is what they're seemingly doing right now. But I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. I didn't expect it to include the intelligence sharing about the missiles headed towards hospitals and civilian homes, especially if he's trying to keep a consistent message that this is based out of compassion for civilians somehow, and then you're undermining the defense of those civilian communities. So, like, I just
speaking of speaking of civilians, how are you processing this after everything you've seen on the ground doing journalism in Ukraine? How are you personally feeling about this?
I mean, I feel awful. I feel like I feel like my family had like betrayed Ukraine. I mean, I am an American. I was born here. I was raised here. I pay taxes. This is my country. Our country made commitments to Ukraine for over 30 years, and we have continuously violated it again and again and again. Not only when we decided not to act really and did very minimal action in 2014, but now we're seeing a complete betrayal. And while I would feel moments of shame when I would see things like, I don't know, the pausing of aid to Ukraine, or like some sort of lecturing or talking down to the Ukrainian people, or just a complete lack of knowledge about the conflict or the region being shown by people who are decision makers on this. This is a backstabbing. This is a betrayal of Ukraine. This is the death of the Ukraine-American alliance. Maybe somebody will come out in 2 years with some pads and try to bring it back together. I have no clue. But this happened so rapidly and was so cruel in the way it was done, with no time for the Ukrainians to prepare. It seems spite-based. It's one thing to abandon the Ukrainians, but to abandon them by pulling the rug out from underneath them because Zelenskyy refused to bark for you shows that Trump's ego is getting people killed, like it did around Avdiivka back in when they held the aid before, and the aid was held up in 2023 and 2024. So, I mean, this isn't the first time Trump's ego or his meddling in our diplomacy got people killed in Ukraine. This is just the most recent example, and this is the example that's going to end up destroying the relationship between the Ukrainian and the American governments, and also negatively impacting the relationship between our peoples. I don't think I will be received the same way I was received last time.
Have you talked to any Ukrainians about this? What were their reactions?
I mean, it was all anger. It was all anger or betrayal. There didn't seem to be complete shock because it was kind of rumbling up. We were starting to hear Trump talk about this type of stuff recently with the attacks on Zelenskyy, and of course he talked on the campaign trail. People were just hoping that it was just a bunch of nonsense. I tried to treat it seriously. I think I've been validated in the treating of these statements seriously. But I mean, people feel betrayed. People feel betrayed by the United States. People feel like the United States is now working with the Russians against them. And I mean, they think that, you know, the deaths will be partially responsible, be due to the United States decision making. I mean, this isn't even like an attempt at peacemaking, really. This is like just Trump trying to see if he can just force them through the door as quickly as possible so he can wave a piece of paper around. This is not even like a strong attempt towards peace. I don't know how they could feel any other way but betrayed, abandoned, and like the United States government is a den of snakes.
Is that the same for soldiers and aid workers, volunteers? How are they feeling?
I mean, I would say it's, I mean, I haven't talked to like I haven't talked to volunteers. I've talked to some soldiers. I've talked to like some civilians, and I generally have gotten that reaction. A lot of it seems to be focused. Like I've also gotten a few messages of sympathy, like good luck dealing with Yankee Yanukovych, basically. Like you're gonna, good luck. Okay, we've dealt with this for decades. Have fun with the oligarchization of. It's not like a mocking have fun, like an actual compassionate, like, good luck, man. Because we're seeing that. We're seeing the unconstitutional freezing of funds, gutting of institutions that are meant to regulate the rich and powerful, being gutted by the rich and powerful Elon Musk with the death of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, unconstitutional murder of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They don't have the power of the purse. And so I think, you know, there's the war level, and there's the American democracy level, because the hope would be in 4 years past Trump, maybe America could move on again. But that was the hope in 2020. And we saw how that ended.
Saying that, did they make any preparations for a worsening situation when the possibility of Trump being elected was becoming?
There was this talk in Europe about Trump proofing NATO and aid to Ukraine by trading the mechanism from, for example, being managed from the United States, these is like the Ukraine support group, to being managed by NATO. Therefore, if there is a change in Washington, that would not immediately disrupt all the aid being sent to Ukraine. So that was something they did. But besides that, I mean, it was really all I would think about is maybe there was like some reservation in Ukraine, maybe of some artillery to be prepared for this outcome in case it was cut off. But I mean, you want artillery stockpiles no matter what. So I don't know what else they could have done besides make all these investments sooner in Europe, and they did not want to, because they have other economic problems that they're facing.
And what do you think their biggest concerns are right now?
I think the biggest immediate concern, I think, well, number one, intelligence sharing is going to be pretty brutal, because obviously not having information about these missiles coming into your cities is going to hurt. But production is the big thing. Europe needs to be able to basically replace what was the expansion of American artillery production, including aid packages that were meant to expand it. So this year, expanded artillery production could be sent to Ukraine. They're going to have to replace that themselves. They're going to have to buy up international arms stockpiles that are left. They're going to have to find every avenue they can to allocate funds towards ammunition production. They're going to have to get that production up and running quick. And there might even need to be, and I mean, this is maybe sounds a little extreme, there might even have to be a loosening of the regulations when it comes to the arms industry. When it comes to the idea that this factory will not run 5 days a week, it will run 7 days a week. That, you know, these factories maybe won't be running 24/7 hours, but maybe they'll run 18 hours a day, and you'll have shifts where people will work at night. You know, I mean, to pick up the difference, Europe's going to have to pull up their goddamn bootstraps in a way that they haven't seen, well, since the 40s.
I'm going to ask you a few more questions on Europe a bit later in this. I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball on this one. In 2019, Trump was impeached over his phone call with Zelenskyy, in which he pressured Zelenskyy to investigate Hunter Biden in exchange for military aid. Do you think Trump's impeachment played any part in his decision to withdraw aid from Ukraine now?
No, I don't. From the way that I've always seen Trump talk about the phone call, about the great, fantastic, beautiful phone call, it always seemed to be in the reference of, hey, look, Zelenskyy thought it was great too. He said there was no problems. And he always gave Zelenskyy credit for not going out there and saying, I got strong-armed, because he was being diplomatic towards a powerful nation that he needed the support of. But I think all of that goodwill is at this point dead, but I don't think that it had really any impact on sending aid to Ukraine. I think it might have had, I think like the idea about Hunter Biden and Burisma in Ukraine, I think that stuff might have had an impact on the rank and file of the Republican Party and how they view the war, because of just the stuff that gets disseminated on social media. But no, I don't think that the impeachment had an impact on this.
And how do you feel the media is covering this? They're covering it the same way they did Russia back then?
There seems to be some seriousness amongst people that I respect. I think Bernie Sanders has been much louder than I expected him to be, and I'm very happy about that he's been making this an active part of his basically campaign against oligarchy across the country. I appreciate that. But when it comes to the media organizations, they need to speak in moral terms. They need to speak in moral terms, and they need to force, like Caitlin Collins did with Marco Rubio, conversations in moral terms. On top of the fact, I mean, of course you could talk national security and all this other stuff, but people need to be jolted and reminded exactly what Trump is negotiating on behalf of when he negotiates on behalf of the Russians like this, by giving up all Ukrainian leverage before negotiations have even started. What occupation means to people, what Bucha really was, the fact that there's a human safari going on in Kherson, and basically nobody knows about it. I haven't met an American, and I've said the words human safari, and they knew what I was talking about. The only ones I know are the people who are as focused on Ukraine as I am. So obviously, either the media thought the brutality got stale, or viewers thought the brutality got stale, but that doesn't mean you stop covering the brutality, or it doesn't deserve as much emphasis. All that means is you need to find new ways to cover it to bring people in. It means you need to try harder, not switch topics. And I feel like the easier thing to do is the latter, and so sometimes the media does that. They have been covering this, but I mean, like, how long are they going to keep the pressure on this? How long? Is this going to, are they going to allow Trump to use his focus machine, his focus attack of just doing a million things at once? And before you know it, we're going to be talking about the next scandal of, Pete Hegseth, like doing 3 shots off of like some prostitute's butt, or fucking who knows what the dumb scandal is going to be, right? But once you've got all that distraction in a week, even some distraction that might even get some extra viewership, will they continue to bring attention to this? I don't know. And my hopes are not extremely high, to be quite honest. But I hope so. I hope they get some fucking Edward R. Murrows back up there instead of having CBS settle with the Trump administration in cave.
That was actually my follow-up question. Do you think the MSM is correctly portraying the consequences of withdrawing aid? I think you've already answered.
I don't think they're not describing it in enough detail. They just say like, oh, Ukraine will be like, oh, it'll be bad. No, you should say, oh, it'll be much easier for the Russians to hunt civilians like this. Here's some footage like this. Here's some footage like this. Here's some footage. They do this. They post videos of it on social media. They like to do it for fun, and they'll probably do it more. They might take this city, maybe they'll just put the civilians on the wall and shoot them. I mean, they just need to talk about it like it is. And it, like, I'm not saying like, oh, we need to completely just talk about this war in moral terms, forget about atomic warfare, forget about the strategic. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying people have no fucking idea how bad it is. And every time I tell people how bad it is, I can see it in their eyes, just like this change of like, Jesus, fuck, I had no idea. And the fact that I have that experience with everyone I meet in the United States means somewhere they're failing.
And do you think Russia sees this as an opportunity to escalate that further?
Oh, you mean the war against you? Absolutely. Oh my God, are you kidding me? This is the thing. In fact, this might even be the best case scenario for the Russians. This could be the nightmare scenario where America's backed off. The Russians have no incentive to make peace. They think that they just held off all of NATO, made up of the United States, this industrial powerhouse where California has a higher GDP than all of Russia, and Europe and Ukraine. And now America's gone. They're not giving them intelligence support. They're not giving them artillery. They're not giving them air defense. They're not giving them anything. They're not even going to tell them when the missiles hit their children's hospitals. So if they were able to stand up and advance somewhat, standing against the United States, the largest, most powerful nation on the, not the largest, but the most powerful military power on the planet, and Europe and Ukraine, and now they just need to face off Ukraine and Europe, when Europe is not even ready with this industrialization, when some of Europe is even divided on the topic, like the Hungarians and the Slovaks. I mean, I've seen that the Irish just sent their first air defense radar system. That's a change. The Irish are usually pretty, let's just say, wishy-washy on Ukraine. It's like, oh, we don't like what's going on over there, but weapons, I don't know about that, buddy. That's a change, and I'm seeing these changes, but they've got to make up the entirety of America's defense capacity. And so from Russia's perspective, if we could face all 3 of them, it'll be easier to face 2 of them. It'll be easier to advance, and they could keep the war going. That's why this decision by Trump, despite it supposedly being directed towards ending the war or making the war shorter, could actually end up extending the war, encouraging the Russians to keep up the pressure.
My next question was actually about Europe on that one, and you went into that. So how much do you think European aid can realistically replace what the US was providing? Right
now, not all of it. It's just not possible. I don't think it's like physically possible. I mean,
Do they have any
okay, look,
stockpiles?
it is true that they could take everything they actually have right now and like start handing it, maybe make up the difference. Yes, but they're not going to do that because, you know, states, their main goal is survival. And while it is true that the Europeans have a better chance surviving together as a bloc, they're not going to give up all of their defense articles to the Ukrainians and be left with nothing. And if, in order to make up that difference right now, some European states would have to do something that's kind of like that, give up a lot of the stuff that keeps them ready. And I think some reduction in military readiness is necessary. In fact, I've been criticizing the Biden administration for denying any reduction in military readiness when it comes to the amount of shells we're sending over, because due to the fear of not being able to respond to some crisis. But if the crisis is right now, I'd rather deal with the crisis now than deal with 3 crises down the line and be prepared for that. You put out the fire now. Don't hold the water and wait for the fire that's bigger, which will come once the fire expands. You know, do you get what I'm saying?
Why do you think Europe waited so long to finally unlock the war chest?
I think part of it is they like the idea of America coming in and dealing with it, making up 50% of the aid, of military aid, 40%, I think at this point, is like such a big gap to make up. And Europe's facing a lot of economic problems. The Germans have an auto manufacturing crisis in a country that is heavily employed by auto parts and auto car manufacturing. The Germans have an infrastructure problem that they have to fix. Their economy's not in the best state, and now they're going to have to massively expand defense spending. I mean, Macron said that, you know, we will no longer benefit from the peace dividend. Our hope is now that just our children will be able to, right? So that is not a popular thing to tell your voters, that, hey, things are going to get a little worse. We're maybe going to have to take some social spending and move it here, or we're going to have to increase taxes, which Macron said he does not want to do, or we're going to have to do X, Y, and Z and go into debt in favor of Ukraine's defense because Ukraine's defense is our defense. That's an argument that they're going to have to make. I've seen them start to make it. It's necessary that they're going to have to say that, yes, there'll be sacrifices, but it's necessary for our defense. It's a question of the European voter being receptive to that. I mean, think about this from a German perspective. The German far right just had the best performance in a parliamentary election since, I mean, again, World War II comparisons, but since Hitler. It was they were the second best performing party at 21%. Compared to the main performer who was just 7 points ahead of them. And so if you're the Germans and you're looking at it from that perspective, and the AfD is strong, is basically pro-Russian. It's not even anti-support for Ukraine. It's pro-Russian, right? And that's a pro-Russian party getting that performance. Do you want to now turn to your public and say, hey guys, we're going to have to cut some social spending to send over to Ukraine. Hey guys, we're going to have to take on more debt, even though we take pride in not taking debt, in order to send it over to the Ukrainians. Hey guys, whether or not it's the right decision, which I think it is, whether or not it's a move that is necessary for the preservation of the state, that doesn't take away the negative short-term implications of that political impact for the incumbent. And there is a wave of anti-incumbency going across the globe. So I think some of it, to be honest, is people choosing short-term political success over the long-term security interests of the state.
And do you think this reshapes how small nations view their alliance with the US?
Yeah. I mean, Taiwan, like the former Taiwanese president has been open that they are heavily watching how America performs in reference to Ukraine to like get an idea of not only how that will affect how the Chinese view it and how it'll affect how others view these types of reconquistas of land, but also to, you know, make America's security promises more, you know, strong, more credible. And it makes it less credible. So if you're an American ally like Taiwan or an American ally like South Korea, yeah, the situation is quite concerning. The Japanese have expressed concern.
And can they provide the military aid that Ukraine needs? Do they have the right weapon systems? Can Europe and the other nations actually provide them with the weapons to continue fighting?
Europe is going to have to. They don't have what's necessary to make up all the gaps, especially when it comes to things like air defense. That's something they're going to have to invest in or find other parties who can supplement it until they have the industry in place. I mean, you could talk about continue taking this money and investing it inside of Ukraine because a dollar goes much farther in Ukraine in defense production than it goes in France and Germany. Those workers need to be paid more. Those workers usually have tons of fantastic benefits. The regulations are usually much higher. But in Ukraine, the dollar can go much further. So they can do like tricks like this to try to get like a lot more drones, because the Ukrainians are really good at building drones. And they can continue to increase capacity if you give them more resources. But some stuff they're just going to need to basically they just don't have the production capacity for. They're going to have to build it. And they should have built it 3 years ago, but now they're going to have to race it. I think about other parties that could come in to try to fill the gap, like the South Koreans. But the problem is that South Korean opposition, who is pretty popular right now after the previous president, who's actually kind of a supporter of Ukraine, tried to coup the government. That government does not look like he's going to be sending any more aid to Ukraine. And the only time that South Korea sent aid to Ukraine was through the United States, because they cannot send aid constitutionally to war zones. They can only send it to nations not at war. So they sent it to us in America, and then we sent it to Ukraine so they could get around that. America's not going to do that again. America's also not going to be encouraging them to do that again. And so why would South Korea do it? South Korea would have to do it out of its own interests, which I don't think the South Korean opposition is bold enough to do that.
And I'm not a weapons expert, but can these nations produce the munitions that they need? Can they?
You mean in Europe? Well, this is what I'm talking about. They don't have the production in place in Europe to make up the gap. There's going to be a deficit. The question is whether or not they could invest and loosen regulations and do what's necessary to expand production fast enough. And I mean lightning fast, as in put up the factory yesterday, in order to make up that gap while buying up international stockpiles, which are already been heavily dried up by this war.
And are there any alternatives to make up for the loss?
I mean, South Korea was one, but I just described some of the problems with that.
Yeah.
Japan, I think they do produce some, not nearly as much as South Korea. A lot of these parties would need to take convincing and pressure from the United States, honestly. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a problem, because Trump, if he doesn't have any interest in supporting Ukraine, means it'll probably largely be a European endeavor. Now, maybe if Taiwan, truly believes that, Ukraine's future is tied to their future, maybe they'd send more support. But the problem is, if they believe that and they think the writing on the wall is it's bad for Ukraine, they would want to save that support at home, not hand it over to the Ukrainians, no? Mm-hmm. But my point is that a lot of this would require the United States to show initiative to get them to rally behind Ukraine. And without that American leadership position, it's going to be hard to unite nations of the Pacific continent to Europe to bridge that divide. And it kind of boxes in the Ukrainians largely in with the Europeans. I mean, I just saw the president of Argentina, Milei, delete all of his pictures with Zelenskyy off of his social media in order to scrub the record, like he was hanging out with him, because they're scared of, what that implication could maybe mean for maybe the White House or other diplomatic engagements they have. So, I mean, where America goes, a lot of its allies go.
If Trump flip-flops again and they agrees a deal with Zelenskyy tomorrow to resume military aid to Ukraine, do you think that will have a lasting impact on the conflict? Or do you think Ukraine just won't trust them again? I
mean, the resumption of aid, of course, would be beneficial. More shells, more artillery systems, more excavators. These are things that Ukraine desperately needs. But the problem is a lot of the damage is already done. The Russians are not going to think that our alliance is united if Trump is going out, going in, going out, going into the alliance, cutting off aid, resuming aid, cutting off aid during the Battle of Avdiivka, resuming aid, cutting off aid because Zelenskyy wouldn't properly brown nose, resuming aid later after Zelenskyy does a little bit of brown nosing. They're going to see a massive weakness, and the weak partner in this alliance, in this agreement, will be the United States. They'll be the one with the least willpower. They'll be the one that they think they can manipulate the clearest, and they'll be the one that they think that they can either pull out through, bribing them with, mineral deal this, mineral deal that, or trying to dissuade them other ways, either through manipulating the societal fabric, through spreading of disinformation, or organizing protests and counter protests against one another, like they did during the Black Lives Matter protest movement. But I mean, the point is that the alliance, the unity of the alliance, the strength of the alliance, the strength of Ukraine's leverage has already been solidly undermined by Trump. Even if he was to resume all aid tomorrow, a lot of this damage has already been done. It would be good. Ukraine would have that support. The physical reality in the battlefield would not transform that much, but the psychological view of the Russians would, and they would smell blood in the water, and that would mean keep going. We can get a better deal.
And if Ukraine still manages to succeed in spite of America's withdrawal, how do you think that changes the narrative about the United States on the world stage?
Man, I mean, I hope and pray for that, of course. But I mean, I think it would hurt. Not only American credibility has already been hurt here. If you've been thinking about allying with the United States, this is going to be an example that people think about for a while. But if Ukraine was able to survive despite it, I mean, American credibility would be smashed 10 times more. Because not only did Trump not save the people he said he wanted to save and all these civilians, not only did he not win the war, he was wrong about the fact that the Ukrainians could. He was wrong about the fact that the Ukrainians could get a better deal. And so American leadership credibility would be properly smashed. And other nation states, if we were to advise them to do this or that in peace negotiations, they'll think back to that. And I think it could actually decrease our leverage because they'll think, definitely at least the Trump administration, to have poor judgment when it comes to guarding your own leverage or, assessing leverage.
And do you think America can recover from the perceived cowardice, the betrayal?
I mean, yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, the Russians have a million problems now. We all seen them a million different ways with corruption or poor morale, etc. A ton of economic problems that Trump is talking about lifting sanctions on them to help them relieve them, to remove the pressure, which would probably be one of the most devastating things Trump could do, is to allow American CNC machines to go to Russia and produce Russian bombs that bomb Ukrainian cities. But I mean, it wouldn't be impossible for them to recover for the same reason that other nation states aren't perfect. The Chinese are making mistakes. The Russians are making mistakes. So as long as human beings are imperfect and other partners and other countries make mistakes, we can recover. But it's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a lot of cleaning up the mess. I mean, Biden spent 4 years trying to clean up Trump's mess, only for the mess to get 10 times bigger. So,
and it's not just about America's ability to recover their image, it's Americans. So even for yourself, do you think you'll find it harder to get access or insights on your underground coverage now?
I really don't know. I think that there's still an incentive for American journalists to come here and cover the war because the Ukrainians understand that there are people in America that support Ukraine. In fact, the majority of Americans still support Ukraine, and that the election was close. And so I don't think they want to completely we will always, America, goodbye. They've stopped, the Ukrainians have stopped intelligence sharing with the United States. So we're no longer getting intelligence from the Ukrainians. So, I mean, that's bad. But at the end of the day, I think that they still would still like America's support. It would save lives, it would help them. And so I think that there would be a certain amount of foolishness to completely reject any American journalists, especially ones that are coming with, a long record of being, I think, accurate about the war. But on the other hand, if you don't know who I am and all you know is he's an American journalist, you start to make assumptions. You start to guess. You start to speculate, It's impossible for a lot of Ukrainians to hear somebody's Russian and not to immediately think they support the war. Or maybe they support the war. Or maybe they supported my family being bombed. Maybe they supported this horrible atrocity. Maybe they supported Bucha. Because statistically, there's a lot of Russians who support the invasion. There's a lot of Russians who support the invasion. And statistically in the United States, there's a decent amount of Americans now that don't want to support Ukraine, that are comfortable with the backstabbing. Not the majority, but there's enough to consider it a base of support. And so I could see them maybe thinking that that's the type of person that I am, with them not knowing me, because, that's their recent experience with the United States. So, yeah, I mean, it could have some negative impacts.
Will this change how you approach covering the conflict? Are you gonna make any changes to your focus and content? Or?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I still want to cover the stuff that I want to cover. I still want to cover the Battle of Pokrovsk. I think I might do something specifically on the United States. I might go through and get every single time a soldier has thanked America for aid and release a mega compilation of it, just to prove that this idea of say thank you is complete bullshit. But I honestly, I think I might talk more even though I have already talk in moral terms, talk as the idea, talk from maybe try to express a perspective from the Ukrainians of how they view themselves now divided between two empires, sold out. I think the narrative of exactly America's involvement is going to heavily change, and how I talk about the war as an American is certainly going to change. That's for sure.
Just a couple more questions, Dylan. You often say that news or journalism is the first draft of history. What do you think history will say about this moment?
I think history will say about this moment is that there were a lot of enabling to this point. That there's many different places that this could have been stopped, whether it was Trump's first nomination, Trump's second nomination, the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard, the nomination of RFK. There's a million different ways that maybe this could have been avoided. And I can't say that any specific one of these things could have been the deciding factor. But let's say, let's not even go back to like stopping Trump from winning. But let's say that there wasn't the, let's say Murkowski or other centrist Republicans did not vote for people like Tulsi Gabbard to give the president an intelligence briefing every day. Somebody who was warning the public about the biological research development in Ukraine, parroting Russian talking points. The Russians believe she's like their girl. So if you were to block those nominations and make it so Trump had to nominate somebody who was competent, maybe that would have changed his decision-making to some degree. Maybe they would have told him to wait on pausing aid or pausing this, and something else could have been done, and the tightrope walk could have been walked properly. But the best thing you could have done is avoid the tightrope walk altogether. Not to trust a man who has zero dedication to democratic principles, who's not only willing to, call democratic leaders dictators, but try to develop a dictatorship, I believe, honestly, in the United States. And I mean, that's not like a nice thing to say. I know that's maybe not politically correct, but at the end of the day, he said that he wanted the Constitution to be terminated and for him to be made president. That I don't know what more clear call for like a dictatorship, or if that's too extreme for you, power without objection, power without opposition, as he's smashing down the checks and balances system. This was not somebody who was ever going to be dedicated to Ukraine for moral reasons. All this shit about the civilians and protecting civilians, this guy said he wanted to bomb the families of terrorists, kill civilians deliberately as a tactic for war. He does not care about civilian casualties. He doesn't. If he did, he'd be talking about the war in Gaza a little differently than as a hotel development project. So the best thing we could have done is avoided the person who does not care about democratic principles, blocked aid to Ukraine in order to get dirt on his political opponents, blocked aid to Ukraine during the crucial Battle of Avdiivka, and has continuously lied about the war, and has lied more about the war than he has said honest truths about the war. Where if you listen to the president on the war, you are making negative progress. You are learning negative. Where you start at a 0 point where you know nothing about Ukraine, he talks to you about it. You have to not learn from scratch. You need to learn from under the ground. We have to dig yourself out of these dumb fucking rabbit holes. So, I mean, the Trumpification of the Republican Party being avoided, I think obviously could have changed this outcome. If this was President Nikki Haley or even President Marco Rubio, this would be a very different outcome.
And final question, speaking of Trump. Trump says that Zelenskyy is pushing another world war. Do you think we're actually on the brink of another world war?
No. I mean, when people say brink, that makes it sound like we're about to engage in atomic hellfire.
Yep.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that. In fact, I would say that right now, due to the fact that the Russians know that the Americans are more than willing to negotiate with them, we're probably at a uniquely undangerous moment for the war. I mean, I would also say like post-Trump election, like, I mean, I didn't really have those gigantic over on the brink concerns before. I had concerns about the war spiraling out into an atomic confrontation, but I was never in a panic at any particular moment about atomic hellfire. I was never really.
Even with Macron saying he's going to up nuclear deterrence?
What do you mean, nuclear deterrence?
He wants to extend the development of nuclear weapons, I believe.
Yeah, but that's not brink of World War III. I mean, he says he wants to, but what country is going to be taking these atomic weapons. How long is it going to take to develop those weapons? I mean, he's talking about an idea, right? I don't think that's the stage where we're at the brink of World War III. But I mean, it's not surprising that he's talking about that. People talk about World War III for views. That's why people talk about we're on the brink of World War III. If you want to talk about World War III as a realistic scenario, one way that it could happen is that the United States indicates that we don't actually care all that much about Ukraine. Kiev looks like it's about to fall because the situation has like spiraled out of control so horribly. And then Trump's approval ratings take such a curb stomping, he panics, flip-flops again, re-enters. The Russians don't believe he's really committed to it, but this time he is, and then we have a confrontation. Because the Russians cannot assess what our interests are, because Trump can't even assess what his interests are. And so that would be something I would say, oh, that's a problem, because that's a way both of us can overstep to atomic level. So that would be an example of something where I'd say, oh shit, we're on the brink. We're nowhere near that. Well,
thank you very much, Dylan. I enjoyed asking you these questions. Hope you enjoyed it too.
I don't know, man. Stream is, I love my job, but these last few news days have been painful, man. They've been bad. They've been bad.
I do have one last question.
Yeah?
Ye never lose or Pepe always wins?
Honestly, I'm more of a Dick's poster myself.
All right. Thanks, Dylan. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Whew. I also like the little NAFO dudes. They're cute.